Welcome everyone to this final event for this study on EU's global leadership in renewables. Thank you for joining it. We hope for an interesting morning. Before we embark on presenting our study results, I'd just like to give the floor to Ruud Kempener from DG Energy. Please, Ruud.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is my first time in the office since I think a year and a half. With this nice weather, I suggest if you have a laptop, don't stay in the office. Go inside and enjoy the sunshine. This study, for which we wrote the terms of reference in 2018, is actually increasingly becoming relevant. As you know, the European Commission has its European Green Deal, which is its growth strategy. And this is indeed what this study has been looking at in particular. Of course, the European Commission and the European Union as a whole has always been promoting renewable energy. And this year, we might reach the 20%, or actually last year, that we claimed for 2020. However, looking forward, we know that renewables have to grow in order to achieve our targets. We've now set our objective of 55% greenhouse gas emission reductions by 2030, and that by itself implies a rapid scale-up of renewables, more than we've done in the past. Looking beyond that, 2050, we're also seeing renewables being the majority of our energy production. But of course, that has implications, and I think these are the elements which have already been reflected in the strategies which have been published by the European Commission in the last year and a half. If we, for example, look at the industrial strategies, there was one published in 2020, and now recently in 2021 again. You have 14 ecosystems, and one of those ecosystems is renewables. So indeed, renewables is becoming one of the growth sectors of Europe. If we look at the options which we have for the decarbonization of our energy system and reducing emissions by 2030 and 2050, we're looking at the direct deployment of renewables. We're looking at electrification through renewables. We're looking at renewable fuels produced by renewables, including renewable hydrogen. So all of these options and all of these different pathways are important for not only achieving our decarbonization objectives, but also creating this important value chain within Europe. Last but not least, we're seeing also internationally other countries, other regions following the targets which are set by European Union for 2050. So also outside of the EU, there are lots of opportunities and growth markets for renewables. And we know that EU companies are very important in the supply chain, and some of the biggest players are all European. So the reason why we did this study in 2018, and like I said, this is even becoming more relevant right now, is that we wanted to have better insights and more detailed insights in how this value chain of the European renewables industry has evolved over time, and how it might evolve into the future, and how this impacts the competitiveness of not only the industry itself, but also Europe in terms of gross value added and jobs. Secondly, we wanted to look into specific policy options, because of course now we have the Fit for 55 package, which is coming up, which has legislation across the board, and not only for renewables, but also for energy efficiency, but also in terms of international activities, including our proposal to develop an external energy agenda for the beginning of next year. So we have all of these opportunities to create new policies in place. And this is, again, where we wanted to have this study, not only to look at different kind of policy options, but also gives us some more details about how these specific policy options then not only impact deployment in terms of capacity of gigawatts or petajoules of energy consumed, but also how does this affect these value chains all the way from R&D to deployment to the end of life. So today we have the results of this study. I look very much forward to it, and also look very much forward to the discussion afterwards. So thank you very much for joining us, and back to you, Marlene.
Thank you very much. Hien, could you maybe put on the slides? So if you go to the first one or the second one. Thank you. What we have here is that we have just to set the kind of the operational scene here, as was also mentioned in our invitation for this event. The study essentially considers two key study questions. One, what are the key countries, key markets, and key activities in the global renewable energy supply chain? And second, what policies would best support the industrial competitiveness of the EU renewable energy industry and its added value to the EU economy and society? What we will present to you now is what we have come up with in terms of providing answers to these two questions. In answering study question one, it's a data-driven approach largely, but not solely, involving statistical analysis that combines several data sources and is informed also by stakeholder consultation. The key there is also that the sector is broken down into value chain and value chain segments, and that we have supplemented by case studies that look into emerging new technologies. When it comes to study question two on the policies that could best support, you could say that one of the key characteristics of what we have done here is that we have extensively within the scope or the boundaries of this project conducted stakeholder consultations to learn about needs and perceptions among the full stakeholder community, and supplemented that with desk research. We have developed an Excel tool to assess quantitatively the impacts on gross value added and jobs from options that were considered. And obviously, in this study, it's not a fully fledged impact assessment, not even an impact assessment light that we have done, but nevertheless, for the sake of comparison, and for the sake of ensuring a consistency, we have applied the logic of an impact assessment when identifying and assessing these options. Next slide, please. As Ruth said, we started this study in January 2020. It was contracted by DG Energy. It's been conducted by COWI together with Prognos and CEPS. Apart from, you can say, the analytical answers to the two study questions, it's important to say that stakeholder involvement has been a significant element of developing this study. So we've conducted 4 specific stakeholder workshops. This is the last of the 4. We've conducted scoping interviews, expert assessments, and we've had more than 40 bilateral in-depth interviews. And the outputs will include the detailed study reports, quite technical reports, a synthesis report, a brochure, and all this is to be completed by the end of this month. Next slide, please. This is an overview of the agenda that we planned for today. So first, the introduction, which is finished by now, 4 minutes late. Then we'll have a presentation of the economic impacts of renewable energy value chains and their competitiveness. That is essentially the answers to study question 1. And then we'll have a presentation on the policies that the study has identified to promote competitiveness and growth. That's this answer to the second study question. Then we'll have room for a short coffee break. And after that, we'll have 1 hour of panel discussion and question and answers for the panel. We'll come back to that when we start that this element. This will be facilitated by Ruth from DG Energy. And last, a short wrap up. As you can see below, there are some notes here. We would very much like that we would welcome very much welcome questions. However, we will also, because we are a big audience here, ask you not to raise your hand, but instead post your questions in written. Make sure that you mute your mics when you're not speaking, and for your information, the event is recorded. For further practicalities, I now give the floor just to you, Jen, if you have something to add. Jen? Not really. I don't know. Does anyone hear Jen?
I can hear you.
I can say it again. So that's just one last thing we would like to ask everybody to do is to add your organization name next to your name. So in the Zoom name, you have a button to the right side, and you can click on it and you can rename your name. So just to make sure that your name and your organization name appears, so you can see you and you know where you're from. Thank you.
Much. And after this introduction, I will then give the floor to Prognos for continuing on presenting our analysis and answers to study question 1.
Thank you, Marlene. My name is Jannis Lambert from Prognos. We conducted the work on work package 1 on the economic data analysis. And I would like to give you an overview now on what we did in the study to analyze value chains and the global positioning of the EU in these value chains, and present some of the main results. Next slide, please. As you may know, economic data on renewable energy is not directly provided by economic statistical sources such as Eurostat or UN data sources. So you need to base your assessment on a modeling approach. There are various approaches that are applied for these questions, each with own strengths and weaknesses. So approaches on the micro level that use surveys or collect individual company data provide a great level of detail, but they tend to be less comprehensive in their value chain analysis. And then on the other hand, very common are approaches on the macro level, using macroeconomic data and input-output analyses or computable equilibrium models that provide a great comprehensive view on certain indicators, but tend to provide less detail. And we decided to adopt a meso-level approach for this analysis. So we based our analysis or we started from a bottom-up view on the value chains and economic activities involved in these value chains, and then used available statistical data from official sources. So particularly the structural business statistics from Eurostat for employment and GBA, Prodcom and UNIDO data for production, UN trade data for trade analysis, and PETStat for patents, to analyze renewable energy economic effects and competitiveness. We considered the value chains, following 10 value chains that you can see on the right, covering all major renewable energy technologies. Next slide, please. So as I said, we started with a detailed qualitative approach, mapping the individual or the very heterogeneous economic activities and products in the different renewable energy value chains. We applied always the same structure following downstream or upstream activities in the value chain, such as research, project planning, or resource sourcing activities. We covered, of course, manufacturing activities in the center, and also had a look at downstream activities in construction and operational services, and also in end of service life management. And if you go to the next slide, please. We did this analysis on this mapping exercise for all 10 value chains considered. And we also discussed this mapping with stakeholders from the industry who also provided some valuable feedback and extensions to that. If you go to the next slide, please. So this value chain mapping provided the basis for the quantitative analysis. This slide shows the approach to model development. I don't want to go into too much detail here, but just for you as an overview, there were 3 basic main steps involved. So based on the value chain mapping of economic activities, we identified these activities within existing economic classification systems, so particularly the NACE system for economic activities, but also PRODCOM and the combined nomenclature to identify the products that we identified for the value chains. And then in the second step, the challenge was to determine the shares to which extent these activities or products need to be considered, because even though PRODCOM or combined nomenclature, for example, provide a great level of detail in their data, in many cases this is still not detailed enough to really distinguish renewable energy technologies from other applications of these products. So we needed to identify certain shares. We based these estimations of shares on secondary data sources. And we did this estimate specifically for each year and for each country that was considered. All this resulted in the taxonomy of economic activities and products in the value chains, which was the basis for our statistical data analysis. And we conducted further checks and refinements to improve on the modeling results. Next slide, please. So what came out of this? This slide presents one result regarding global market shares, comparing the EU to 2 of its major competitors, based on exports in renewable energy technologies for the year 2018. And we can see that the EU is holding a leadership position in many value chains, particularly in wind power, geothermal energy technologies, and hydropower technologies. So the EU has a very strong position, or EU companies have a strong position in the global export market. But we can also see that China is the main competitor with a leading position in solar energy and also a strong position in other technologies. And we can also see that China is gaining ground very fastly. In the very bottom line, we showed the growth rates in the exports over the last 10 years. And for example, for wind power or bioenergy, China has really impressive growth rates in exports. So it is likely that China will continue to increase its global market shares. For the US, on the right side, we can say that it has some strengths in solar and geothermal exports, but overall it's very much behind compared to China and the EU. There are other players such as Japan or South Korea, for example, who also hold relevant market shares in certain technologies, particularly in solar energy. Next slide, please. So this graph shows the main destination for EU exports of renewable energy technologies. We can see here that the US is by far the most relevant export destination. But also Australia, China, and Turkey are important trading partners. It's interesting to note here with regards to China that, of course, we are importing a lot from China, particularly solar energy or solar PV technologies, but it also goes the other way around, and China demands a high volume of particularly solar-related technologies from European companies. Next slide, please. We also analyzed patents to take a look at innovation or competition in innovation. And this graph shows the global shares of patent filings in renewable energy technologies for the years 2008 and 2016. What is important to note here is that we looked at so-called high-value patent families. That means patent families that are filed in more than one patent office to distinguish it from, let's say, more simple patents that are often filed only domestically. And here we see that the EU is also, with regards to innovation, in a global leadership position. This applies to all renewable energy value chains, with a more fierce competition in solar. But we can also see that China and also Japan and South Korea have increased their global share a lot over the last years. So the leadership position of the EU is definitely challenged with regards to innovation. Next slide, please. With this slide, we take a look at the economic effects of renewable energies in Europe. So here we see a figure for GBA generation. In total, the renewable energy value chains produced more than 125 billion euros of GBA for the year 2018, with wind power on top, but also relevant contributions by the other technologies, particularly bioenergy, hydro, and solar power. Next slide, please. Looking at employment, we found that renewable energy value chains employ more than 1.4 million people in the EU. So it's a significant employment factor, the industry. The graph we see here shows the development over the last 8 years compared to the base year of 2010. And we see here a very heterogeneous development for different technologies. Wind power showed a very positive development, at least until the year 2018. One can expect that there might be a certain drop in the most recent years that have not been covered by the data we had available due to the decreased implementation of wind power in many member states. But well, we also see bioenergy and geothermal energies as an important driver for job growth in renewable energies. And we see the very turbulent development of solar-related technologies with a peak in the early 2010 years and then the sharp drop. But there are also signs of recovery in the most recent years that have been considered. Next slide, please. As a last look into the quantitative results, here we see the distribution of employment and GVA into different value chain segments. And we can see here that particularly construction and operation activities have a very large impact on GVA and employment produced by renewable energies. With regards to person employed, also the aspect of resource sourcing is very relevant. This is due to agricultural activities that have been considered for bioenergy crop production that have a very high employment effect. So this was a quick drive through the results. There are more results in the study. At this point, I would like to hand over to my colleague Ivo for the case studies.
Yeah, thank you, Yanis. So in addition to this work, which was based mostly on statistical data, we conducted six qualitative case studies of technologies which were not covered earlier. And we have looked at battery energy storage systems and EV batteries, renewable hydrogen, floating solar PV. And in that specific case, we looked at the combination on hydropower reservoirs. Then we looked at ocean energy, buildings integrated photovoltaics, and also a floating offshore wind. What we could conclude is that this, as we call them, maturing energy technologies, have an important role to play in Europe's future global leadership. And based on this case studies, we can conclude that the EU is very well positioned in 4 out of the 6. In particular, the EU currently holds a strong position within renewable hydrogen, building integrated photovoltaics, and floating offshore wind and ocean energy. When we look at renewable hydrogen, European companies are well positioned to maintain and further develop their global leadership. The EU has supported research for many years, giving a head start on the development of hydrogen technologies and establishing EU leadership for technologies such as electrolyzers, refueling station, and large fuel cells. The European manufacturing capacity is currently strong, and Europe exports to North Africa, Ukraine, and Australia. And currently, Europe has about half of the global plant capacity for electrolysis hydrogen production. Then when we look at the buildings integrated photovoltaics, even though still a niche market, the global market is currently dominated by European companies. Europe is leading in terms of total installed capacity, and maybe one of the reasons for this is that there has been regulation already from the years 2010, 2015. When we look at floating offshore wind, European companies are pioneers and lead 3/4 of the global projects. In particular, 34 of 50 designs globally, including lighter and effective materials. Another strength is that Europe is currently a global leader in bottom fixed offshore wind, and there are many synergies in terms of project planning, for example. Manufacturing is to a large extent done in Europe, and thus creating European green jobs. And as an additional benefit, Europe benefits from well-developed port infrastructure. Then we also conclude that the EU is in a strong position within ocean energy, in particular due to a high number of ocean energy patents in international markets. In addition, there are more than 100 companies in the EU that are active in the ocean energy sector. And European companies are strong in the areas of installation vessels, for example. However, when we look at EV batteries and floating solar PV, Europe is in a catch-up mode. And we can say that no new countries have a stronger leadership position in those two segments based on these case studies. The global EV market is dominated by manufacturers from Asia, with China, Japan, and South Korea appearing as specific countries. Batteries, however, produced in the EU have the lowest possible environmental impact using materials obtained in full respect of human rights, as well as high social environmental standards. When we look at floating solar PV, China has a strong position within that segment due to its strong solar manufacturing positioning. And while the EU currently hosts some of the leading manufacturers on polysilicon with significant exports to China, the EU's production is only around 12% of the global value. This is the results of the 6 qualitative case studies, which were not covered by the statistical analysis. Then we can maybe move to the next slide. The next one. So that would be Alessandro.
Oh yeah. Hello. In order to support the quantitative estimates and the case studies that Ivo just presented, and as part of the project, we had to develop some policy options to address some problems that limit the competitiveness of the renewable energy industry in Europe. If we can go to the next slide, please. Basically, in order to support this industry, we contacted several stakeholders, primarily industry associations or relevant stakeholders in Europe, and asked some broad questions regarding what are the main problems that are at the moment hampering competitiveness of this industry in Europe. This industry, at least in some value chains, is the most competitive in the world. Unfortunately, this competitiveness is still limited by these factors that I'm going to discuss soon. So basically, we identified some stakeholders and carried out some desk research in order to identify these big macro problems affecting the industry. And together with these stakeholders, we addressed some key priorities that would be essential to consider, at least at European level, to try to improve the competitiveness of the industry. As part of this process, what happened? We identified these 5 macro objectives that were thoroughly analyzed with 5 policy briefs that involved other stakeholders in order to try to find what are the drivers, what are examples of the problems, and what could be the best policy options to try to address these problems. Next slide, please. So how did we identify this policy option? With a mix of methodologies, each of us carried out extensive desk research looking at the prolific literature that has been published in the last 5 years or so on renewable energy in Europe. We had a consultation with activity with key stakeholders, and basically overall we interviewed, out of some 60 stakeholders, we interviewed 43 stakeholders, basically with an average of something like 8 interviews per case study and per policy brief, and we used an open questionnaire using a methodology that might recall a case study approach to try to find confirmation of these main problems affecting the industry, and try to estimate the qualitative impact of what would happen if these problems were removed, if these policy options would be implemented. We had a validation workshop with the main relevant associations representing the renewable energy industry, and we had the comments and written feedback from these stakeholders that approved or not our policy ideas, or also from European Commission. Basically, this iterative process brought us to this identification of solution. Can we go to the next slide, please? That was summarized in these policy briefs that are basically this case study of something like 20 pages of output that address, first of all, the main obstacles to be addressed, the underlying drivers, basically what causes these obstacles that is hampering the competitiveness of the industry, what are the objectives that any eventual policy intervention should try to address, possible policy solution, the interviewer's opinion about the expected impact in terms, for example, of changes to employment, changes to the exports, changes to the local value chains, and so on, and a preliminary quantitative assessment done with the support of COWI and Prognos to the expected impact of this identified policy solution to growth, to gross value added and jobs. This, can we go to the next slide, please? This policy option, of course, they being based on a qualitative approach, have some limitation. They are, first of all, short documents that have been later on synthesized in a synthesis report. They are biased because, of course, they are based on desk research and on between 7 and 9 interviews, as I was saying earlier. And so it's not a fully fledged impact assessment. And most importantly, the quantitative impact that we estimate is non-cumulative. So basically, if supporting research and development might provide a growth in employment of 10%, doesn't mean that this 10% is cumulative to the impacts that we would have supporting some other areas, like, for example, supporting export. So if we go to the next slide, please. With this process, we got to 5 policy briefs that are trying to solve the aforementioned problems. First of all, we have to improve the access to finance for commercially ready renewable energy projects. Secondly, we should reduce the administrative burdens of project permits. Third, we should be bridging the funding gap between research and development and commercialization. Fourthly, we should support the export of these technologies and services. At the moment, I said earlier, we are global leaders in few value chains, but this competitiveness might be leveraged to achieve more ambitious targets. And fifth, we should be fostering global demand for renewable heating and cooling technologies. The overall summary of these policy briefs is that they mix what in the economics literature we might call technology push factors to market demand factors. Basically, the European Commission should try to promote either the push of technology from the business side to the market, and at the other end, also support demand to activate a demand mechanism that might lead to a growth of the sector. So in order to describe these 5 policy briefs, we prefer to summarize them in what has been included in the case study, in the policy briefs in the report, which are the intervention logics. Can you go to the next slide, please? So this is for an example. The first topic that deals with the improved access to finance for commercially ready projects. We move from the left of the slide to the obstacle, the main obstacle to be addressed, to the right, always in green, to the policy intervention that should be implemented in order to support the sector. So, for example, in this sector, we have that being the renewable energy, at least at the moment, a highly capital-intensive sector, despite all the efforts that companies make in trying to promote investments in the sector, the investments are hampered by the difficult access to finance because of a number of reasons that can be found in the report, like, for example, the COVID pandemic, uncertainty of energy demand and prices that make the competition with the fossil sources always changes. And most importantly, something that goes through, that has been found basically in all the 5 case studies, the problem of multi-level governance. So basically what happens, what might be very clear at European level, sometimes is lost at the local level. So there are different differences in subsidies, in technology costs, in opportunity to have permits at the local level that causes problems to investments at the local level for the sector. So the policy solutions that have been identified are ensuring an enabling policy environment for renewable energy investment, better access to European funding programs, establishing an important project of common European interest that has been an instrument so successful for other value chains, like, for example, the manufacturing of batteries, and mobilizing private funding by fast adoption of the famous EU Sustainable Finance Framework, which might push private investments, private funding into the sector and have an immediate impact in pushing the industrialization of important projects in this value chain. The second factor that has been identified and is included in the second policy brief, we can skip to the next slide, please, is reducing the administrative burden. So never mind the big intention of trying to industrialize and diffuse these technologies, there are still important obstacles in terms of red tape in the industry. There are lengthy, complex, and uncertain permitting process in several member states. There is no general competition environment that are dictated by the high number of authorities involved in the permitting process. There are not clear binding time limits or targets. So basically what is very clear at European level now with the recent Green Deal is a bit lost at the national and local level. The ineffective implementation of relevant articles under the Renewable Energy Directive and fragmented, as I was saying, interpretation of national and local rules. So what the authors have promoting is a reform of the article of the ready directive that should make things easier for investors, and the implementation of EU renewable deals that basically bring new mechanisms to identify and reduce all the red tape in switching from the European level to the general European level to local levels. Thirdly, with the third obstacles, with third policy brief, can we go skip to the next slide, please? We have the bridging the funding gap between R&D and commercialization. this basically aspect deals with bridging the valley of death. Basically, some stakeholders have claimed that they are sitting on many patents that are not seeing the light because there is a funding problem. Basically, companies are generously funded by research schemes like Horizon in the initial stages of the technological development, but after the later TRLs, like TRL7 and so on, technologies are not diffused because they are too expensive. So demonstration projects, first of a kind, equipment is not industrialized, it's not diffused because the equipment is too expensive. Therefore, buyers prefer to switch to cheaper, more affordable and thoroughly tested sources of renewable energy. So basically, this creates a problem because everybody wants renewables, the technology is there, patents, innovation, and so on generate growth and employment, as we all know, but the technologies are not used because there is a funding gap. So what we propose is bridging this funding gap via better use of the innovation fund, by creating an EU risk insurance and guarantee fund, because this necessity is proved by the fact that some countries are already starting to move the first steps into creating their own fund because there is a lack at European level, or improve a better coordination between available funding sources. So, for example, better connecting Horizon with Innovation Fund and European Regional Development Fund. Switching to the next slide, we have problems with supporting the export of renewable technologies and services. As I was saying earlier, we are competitive. Unfortunately, our competitiveness is not leveraged because member states focus their support schemes at the local level. So there is no pan-European logic of fostering exports. The effort of national export credit agencies are not harmonized. Again, they deal with local contests, and there are different standards that in different countries. So what we propose is to facilitate deployment of renewable energy technologies for developing countries that might not have targets in terms of reducing pollution, but in many developing countries there are problems of supply of electricity. So basically supporting the buyer might support also production in Europe. The promotion of the alignment of standard internationally and between different phases of deployment and harmonizing the efforts of export credit agencies to create an European agency or better partnering, better integration between national agencies. Fifth, next slide please, we have support to the renewable energy heating and cooling sector. So basically we are dealing with the demand factor. This diffusion of renewable energies renewable energy sources, at the local level has been hampered by the policy environment, which basically include the uncertainty, as I was saying, for the first policy brief in terms of competition between fossil fuel technologies and renewable energy technologies. High hurdles that faced by consumers in adopting heating and cooling solutions, even because sometimes information about the incentives and so on are difficult to grasp at the local level. and limited internal heating and cooling energy planning capacity at the local level. So basically, to promote the diffusion of these technologies, what we are promoting is assessing and reforming the policy affecting the heating and cooling industry at the European level, assess existing public-private initiatives, basically identifying best practice, what has been working well in Europe to diffuse this best practice at the local level, and organize information campaigns and guidance to third countries' authorities to develop better heating and cooling policy. Basically taking best practice at European level and trying to move that down to the local level. So as you can all see from these policy briefs, we are not always addressing more funding from the taxpayer, from the European Commission, but many of the interventions that are requested are simply better regulation, better information for stakeholders at play. Can we move to the next slide, please? So basically, when we did as it's customary, we also did the synthesis report. The synthesis report, what does it do? Summarizes what are the findings of the policy briefs. So what we did is, in fact, summarizing in brief, in 2 pages, basically, the findings of each policy brief to make it easier for the reader to understand, to grasp the content of our study, leaving the details about the impacts out of the synthesis report. But we also did a bit of effort in trying to introduce a new analysis building some taxonomies of policy options. So basically, as part of the 5 policy briefs, we identified in total 17 policy options for local stakeholders, for the European Commission, for national governments. And we also did a summary of the impact of this policy option, introducing, as it's normal, a multi-criteria comparison in terms of effectiveness, efficiency, and so on. The result of this can be found in the next slide, the next of the 2 slides, that basically introduces the main intervention areas of the policy option. As I was saying earlier, if we count the number of the importance of the initiatives that have been proposed before, we see from this simple table that, as I was saying earlier, intervention is not always in the second column on funding, but sometimes it's just dealing with contextual factors or with providing a better diffusion of information and knowledge about what is already there, what is already available to stakeholders. If we move to the next slide, we have that we also did a tentative identification of a major type of impacts. So basically, the policy briefs summarize the impact in gross value added in terms of employment. If we look at the qualitative impact of these case studies, then stakeholders told us that the most of policy option lower the cost for the business cost to do technology, to develop this technology. And as we know, this sector is capital intensive. They improve technologies, they improve trade conditions, and also increase the market supporting basically export of the technologies to other countries. If we move to the next slide, we have that basically the European Commission should try to support all the areas identified in the policy briefs, and the 17 policy solutions will support effectively the European industry. Unfortunately, we also find that the situation it gets more complicated when we go deeper into the areas of these policy briefs. Basically, there are many implications, but in terms of development of competitiveness, but also there is some degree of heterogeneity. Basically, one policy option might affect more one sector. Let's say, for example, geothermal and less other sectors like ocean energy. So one size does not fit all. There is also lots happening at the national and sectoral level. For example, in important areas like the risking, some countries, like for example France or the Netherlands, have been promoting their own risk and guarantee schemes to try to support the deployment of technologies. And there is also the urgency to leverage this potential because while, as I said earlier, the European industry is at the moment competitive, other global players are pressing on and are coming up with alternative technologies. So it's important to try to push now to support this industry. In the next two slides, we have instead basically the impact that these two this technology, these investments in these policy areas might have in terms of first on global on gross value added and then on unemployment. We have that, as you can see from the histograms, the impact is tangible. The middle area is bridging to funding gap. This doesn't mean that investing in supporting innovation and research might have just a 6% increase in terms of global value added. It just simply means that these conservative estimates basically the development might happen later on, basically when when research is translated into innovation, and then past the 2030 target, we might see finally the impact in terms of growth and employment. Then the next slide has also and this also happen in terms of employment. That's it, and I'll stop here.
Thank you, Alessandro. We have tried now to take you very quickly through work that has results that have come out from intensive work over a period of 1.5 years. So it might have been quite condensed. Nevertheless, we'll have a short break now, and maybe if you have time or if you feel inclined to it, we would welcome any reflections, views, comments to what we have presented to you, both in terms of our analysis of the current status as regards competitiveness of the EU industry, and also the prospects, and of course also on the relevance and possible effectiveness of the policy options that we have presented to you. So kindly do add if you have some reflections. Not necessarily, it can be questions, but it can also be reflections. Please add them to the chat, and then when we convene again after a break, we will try to integrate those comments and reflections in the discussion with our interesting panel that we will present to you after the break, or in terms of seeking to provide feedback specifically on the theme that you have raised. So what we'll do now is that we'll take a short break, and then we will convene again in 15 minutes. So that makes it at 11:35 we will be back again and resume with our panel discussion. 11:35. See you then. It's now 11:35, and I suggest that we slowly get started on the next session on the panel discussion and the question and answers. Ruth, you have kindly offered to moderate this part. So I'll hand over to you. Maybe you should take the next slide, Pien, to present the panel.
So thank you very much. I hope everyone had a refreshing break. What we want to do in the next hour is to have a brief discussion with you on the results which have been presented today. We've invited for that a number of panelists, but as you can see, we have also questions in the chat, which I will kind of try to merge into the discussion which we're going to have over here. We have for our panelists four people. We've invited Ulrike Leer. She has also been, she's from the International Renewable Energy Agency, which is also one of the key stakeholders which have been engaged in the study. We have Joshua Gartland from Wind Europe, again, one of the colleagues which have been contributing to the insights which we've used in the study. We have Naomi Chevillard, who is from Solar Power Europe, and we have Felice Simonelli, who's been working on this study from CEPS, but is also now plunging into the world of financing of renewables. But I see we have also colleagues here contributing, who have contributed to the study in the participants. So indeed, please put your questions in there, and then we can use them accordingly as well. Now, to start off, I wanted to actually start with you and Naomi. And with the first question is just very simply your response to the results which have been published here by the study. So on the one hand side, we have the results, which is showing how kind of the value chains have evolved over time for all renewables, of course, and as well as the 5 kind of policy instruments where the study has analyzed how those could kind of impact the competitiveness of renewables industry in Europe. So from the solar power industry, where do you indeed see this added value in terms of the value chains evolving over time? And also, what are kind of the policy areas where you say, okay, yeah, these are indeed crucial to make those 2030 ambitious targets for the EU happen?
Well, thank you first for the invitation and the opportunity to
orange, the new
contribute. I think there is
another color, purple.
Yes, thanks. So thanks again for the invitation. As you said, Ruth, I think this study is very positive because it shows how the importance and increased attention to the renewable energy industry, and it reflects well the increased importance of the renewable energy industry in our economies. And it's, we see this as very positive in parallel with the acknowledgement of renewables as a strategic industrial ecosystem in the last industrial strategy. The challenge, of course, in gathering data is to gather up-to-date data because things are going very fast in our sector. We can see it in the solar industry in the past years. So maybe a couple of reflections on the elements very quickly, and then on the value chain. I think so on innovation, it was very interesting to see that Europe is really still a leader in innovation, and to really see this in data, the fact that we are still leading in high quality patents. In the solar PV industry, we also see that we have equipment manufacturers that have the technologies. We have research and development centers that develop technologies that are leading in terms of publications. The issue is that, as you also saw in your slides, we export these technologies and we do not necessarily develop them in Europe. And that's well, that's something that will have implications in the future in terms of technology supply, strategic independence. Maybe another comment on also on innovation. You pointed out that BIPV was one of the most promising sector for innovative solar PV technology, which is true. We are indeed in Europe leading in actually all integrated PV technologies, building integrated, but also vehicle integrated, increasingly agriculture integrated. That is true, but I also want to share that we are also good in future cells technologies, so not the mainstream cell technologies like PERC that are already dominant in the market, but the next generation technologies like heterojunction or perovskite that will slowly take an increasing share in the market. On the topic of employment, I think it was interesting to see, to have the figures, and it will be interesting to compare them with the figures in the past years. To give you an idea, the solar market in 2019 compared to 2018 has more than doubled. So if we take the figures on the GVA and employment, they probably also more than doubled. And I think this will give us a good impression of the scale and how fast this change is. And another interesting thing that I take from the figures on employment is that you pointed out the importance of construction and operation in the added value. In the solar PV industry, we know that it's driven by rooftop PV installation, which are more job intensive, which also employ an ecosystem of local companies and SMEs. And I think it's also a good signal on the importance of rooftop PV in the development of solar in the future, and the importance that we need to put on these technologies. So in short, I think what steps of the value chains are important. Clearly, installation of renewable projects is very important. It will bring jobs also in the rooftop PV sectors, and we are leading there. But we also have still this technology leadership in the upstream part of the value chain in the technologies, and I think we should keep this in mind in the future, and we should make sure that we keep this this leadership. Yeah. I don't know if you want me to comment maybe later on the policy recommendations.
Yes, let's do this one first, and then we'll go back to the policy options later. To mix it up a little bit, Ulrike, this of course looks at global leadership in renewables, and then if we indeed look at the data, of course you come from an international perspective. Are you convinced that Europe is a global leader in renewables, or do you indeed see that other kind of markets and segments are rapidly of course getting in the same direction as markets are increasing?
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the question. And of course, as you say, we are doing this on a global perspective, and we are looking at value chains on a more global perspective, and might have even contributed to your value chain analysis. For instance, through our leveraging report, which deliberately and explicitly look at different parts of the value chain and at the contributions in terms of people, value added, and so on. And it was interesting to see that broken down for Europe, because I think there is some work maybe missing on the European level. Lots of what you have been showing here has been done on either country or global level, but to see it from the European level has been fairly interesting. Now, coming to the question, I mean, who is the leader on the market? And I think what has been shown here were trade shares. Basically looking at trade from Europe to the world, and to even make let's say, also more informed policy recommendations where we come to later, it would be also interesting to see who is trading with whom and what. So where does it go to? What are the markets? What are the target markets? Who is importing and why from Europe? Because it's close, because it's good, because it's the best, because it's the best value you get for money. And from our perspective, from the global perspective, you might have noticed that we also lately focused, we will be issuing an Africa report later on this year. We have been focusing on renewable energy questions related to access to energy poverty, and questions like this, which of course also, I think Naomi agrees there, is a new or maybe an open field for solar, obviously. And in these markets, Europe is not the main leading force. There are other competitors, mainly because of, I think, also market share policies from other competitors. So maybe there would be a suggestion for Europe and an additional focus. Yeah, to that question, I think that would be it. I do have a lot of questions for the study, so will there be room to ask all of these, or you want me to do that now?
No, there will be room to ask all of these, as we have all of the authors here. So they are in standby to answer any further questions which are coming in.
So I get to that later.
Yes, for sure, no problem. Josh, I now wanted to get back to you, because with Naomi, we talked about, of course, the value chain of solar PV, and both solar and wind are expected, their markets to increase in the next couple of years. Yes, the values chains are slightly different in terms of the segmentation and the GVA associated, etc. Do you see that as well? Do you see that in terms of the statistics, and what does that also mean in terms of, indeed, the leadership role of Europe for wind?
Yeah, thanks, Ruud, and thanks a lot, everyone, for this study. I think it's really a positive first step. Yeah, I mean, of course, the value chains of solar and wind, I would say, are very different. Wind energy in Europe today is a fully fledged industry. We rely on global supply chains. We import a lot of components from Turkey, from China, from India. So trade, especially the import side, is really important to us. I think perhaps one element of context is perhaps missing from this whole discussion, which is the impact of commodity prices. So a member told me recently that wind energy is essentially a metals business to a large extent. In the last year, we've seen copper and steel prices double. We've seen costs of glass fiber go up. We've seen shipping costs as well go up substantially. And this is having a really big impact on the bottom lines of the wind turbine manufacturers and the component manufacturers. So I think this is a really important piece of context, the fact that even before the pandemic, only 2 of the 5 wind turbine manufacturers headquartered in Europe were actually turning a profit. In 2020, only 1 made a profit. In 2021, we'll have to wait and see what happens, but the situation is really severe from the point of view of costs. One thing I don't agree with Ulrike on is that we're not leading in third country markets. I don't think that's the case for wind. I think if you look at every market in the world except for China, and perhaps 1 or 2 in Central Asia, European operators are leading. The Chinese are struggling to penetrate. We do see increased efforts in this regard. Often the Chinese will come with very favorable financing conditions that we don't always think are necessarily market-based. We do suspect that they're using state-backed finance to gain market share in some cases. Nevertheless, we retain leadership in almost all third country markets because of our technology, which is better, and because of our broader portfolio offering. Yeah, I'm not really sure what else to say except for that. I guess one consideration is what happens if costs do continue to go up. I think we might have to think more strategically about the future of wind electricity prices in the context of higher commodity prices.
Just a quick follow-up question, Josh, because now indeed what you mentioned indeed is when you talked about, I understood the 5 companies, these are the manufacturing companies. And what we try to do here in the study is to kind of indeed look at all those segments, including those which are engaged in getting, for example, the wind speed data, getting the permitting ready, as you saw, but also indeed those which are deploying, the project developers which are putting those wind turbines on the ground. Do you see there a differentiation or some of the value segments which are performing better than others, and how to kind of make sure that is aligned across the value chain?
I think if you look at the jobs and also the GVA numbers, and in any case the numbers we've produced, it's really the industrial side that is the majority of that. And I think this is really unique when you look at the renewable energy sectors. Wind is really the only sector where we do have a fully fledged industry. And I think we should really fight to preserve this. In terms of the developer side, the service provider side, obviously we do have a very strong, we have very strong operators there. I think of Ørsted, I think of Enel. But again, to be very honest, I don't see these companies at a present risk. I think they're strong enough. They have massive balance sheets. I think we have to differentiate between the industrial side, which is under severe pressure right now, and the developers and service providers who I think are largely in a good place. So I think we need to make that distinction.
Okay, thank you. Then maybe we can come back to that later also when we discuss the policy options and how those different policy options affect the different parts of the value chain. I would like now to turn to Felice. Felice, of course, you've been... Yeah, sorry, Naomi.
No, and I didn't mean to interrupt. I just want to comment on what Josh said, because I think it's very interesting. In the solar sector, it's true that we also had the differentiation between the industry manufacturing, or what remains of the manufacturing in Europe, and the service providers. And indeed, I think for service providers, they are in a good place, and they have topics like permitting, like the standards, formats, etc., that are very important. But we also see that changing, and in the solar sector, we don't have this. We do have issues with supply of raw materials, but the main issue is supply of manufactured technology. And we see increasingly, I think, every week we have a discussion with some off-takers that start to have concerns on the supply of technology. So I think it's also going to increasingly, those two parts of the value chain are also going to share more and more challenges.
Thank you, thank you. It was very useful that you interrupted there, so we can connect those dots to each other as well. Felice, I wanted to ask you, because you've been part of this study. So if you look kind of across the different technologies, what are some of those kind of horizontal general considerations that you've kind of learned from the study, and what does that mean for the kind of the next steps in supporting EU global competitiveness? You can unmute yourself. That would be great.
Yeah. Okay. So can you hear me? I think now it works. So I would like to start by thanking you, Ruud, Malene, and Divo, and also my CEPS colleagues for giving me the opportunity to participate in this panel discussion. As you may know, some of you may know, I was part of the team preparing this research report. And to cut a long story short, 3 months ago, I decided to change job, to change my life. So I left the finalization of the study report on policy recommendation in the excellent hands of Alessandro and Yen, and I traveled to Rome to start my new career. So when Ivo called me and invited me to participate in this panel, I felt a bit in an inconvenient position, because, I am one of the co-authors of the study report. So, and this may have two main consequences on what I'm going to say. The first is that my views on the quality of the report are certainly biased. I do like the report, and I do like all the policy recommendation that have been presented this morning. The second is that I'm not sure I can add some interesting considerations, because I try to include all my best ideas in this report, and I can't really propose more or better policies to support the renewable energy industry. But exactly as you are asking, I can try to provide a kind of horizontal reading of the report and share with you some lessons that I learned while preparing the chapters on policy supporting the global competitiveness of the renewable energy industry. And this may also build to the second part of the panel focusing on policy. So first, in the 15 months I spent on this report, I have learned that the EU renewable energy industry is a very complex one, encompassing many different value chains. These value chains are very often have all in common only the final production output, that is clean energy. Solar power, geothermal, marine energy, bioenergy, hydropower are very different sectors. They rely on different technologies, different energy sources, different workforce. They even compete with each other to get funds or to get access to available land or water. So these sectors are also different, are also in a very different stage of development. Some rely on very mature technologies producing energy at a competitive price. Some of them are still far from maturity and risk to die or get lost in the so-called valley of death, as Alexandro was mentioning this morning. I believe, however, that all of them are indispensable to achieve the EU energy and climate targets and to make Europe the first climate neutral continent in the world. This means that the EU and national policymakers need to understand the specificities of each segment of the EU renewable energy industry and put forward tailor-made policies that support and meet the specific needs of each different value chain. The second consideration that I have is that while this is a study funded by DG Energy, so we have tried to do as much as possible to focus on policies that can be pushed forward or supported by DG Energy. Ensuring global competitiveness of the renewable energy industry requires a cross-policy approach that needs to break down the silos in which the policy-making process is often divided. Just to make it clear, the policies presented in this study required, for instance, a shared effort by DG FISMA for funding green projects, DG Research and Innovation to bridge the valley of debt, DG Trade to facilitate exports, DG Grow to make sure that the EU standards are recognized globally, DG NEAR and DG INTPA to create new markets for new technologies outside the EU, DG Tax Sud to properly tax fossil fuels, DG Environment to simplify the permitting procedures while protecting the environment, which is equally important. So the question is, how do we make sure that the EU, that on the one hand, the EU policy account for the needs of specific sectors, and on the other hand, all Commission directorates work together to achieve common goals in terms of global competitiveness and open strategic autonomy. I think that there is a solution. Let's put it simply. I think we should rely on industrial policy. So in this respect, 30 years after the Treaty of Maastricht, which allowed the EU to intervene in the field of industrial policy, the new industrial strategy for Europe, prepared by DG GROW, allow us to start discussing about industrial policy without being considered a kind of, communist spy or, want to have this planned economy. I think that the new industrial strategy, and I was very happy that you mentioned this this morning, Ruud, in your opening remarks, contained the best answer to my question. Here we should focus, first of all, on a value chain approach. The strategic value chain, according to the Commission, have 3 distinctive elements: technological innovativeness, economic and market potential, and relevance to address European societal challenges and achieve EU policy goals. There is no doubt that all renewable energy value chain fall within this definition. They are strategic for Europe. So this is why we have to support them. And I think that the new industrial policy strategy for Europe have the full potential to mark a long-awaited paradigm shift in the EU approach to industrial policy, and more generally in the EU approach to the policy process. There is a chance to put the strategic value chains at the center of the policy process. I think that basically the EU should slowly switch from an approach horizontal, so we put forward enabling policies, we facilitate the functioning of the internal market, we support innovation, we support competition, we help financing projects, to more targeted initiative that should be crafted to support the EU industry and ensure the EU strategic autonomy, of course, while preserving the open, competitive and trade-based EU economy, and while addressing the societal challenges that we are living today. So in this respect, I believe that this study, the study by COWI, CEPS and Prognos, could really create a very good foundation to contribute to this paradigm shift in the renewable energy industry. And when you ask me about the next steps, I think that what is needed next is a full-blown strategy to foster the global competitiveness of the EU renewable energy industry. To do this, I think that we need 4 elements. First, we need the diagnostic tools. And in this respect, the value chain analysis that we have performed in the study could become part and parcel of the Commission diagnostic toolkits. I believe that this could complement, for instance, the EU strategic dependency performed by DG GROW. We should make sure to use this tool on an ongoing basis to identify problems and to monitor the progress done in the strategy. Second, we need an action plan. We have tried to put forward a number of good ideas, a number of policy recommendations. This is certainly a good starting point to prepare a full-blown action plan, which should have smart objectives, a clear timeline to achieve such objectives, key performance indicator to measure the achievement of the objectives, but also a very precise set of action that we want to put in place to move fast forward. Third, we need an effective governance. I believe that there is a need for a bottom-up approach, so the solution should focus on the value chain, but it's also important to decide who takes the driver's seat and ensure synergies between all the relevant actors and all the relevant actions. And this is also maybe a question for you, Ruud. Can DG Energy drive? Or do we need maybe a multi-stakeholder approach team similar to the industrial forum that has been recently created by DG GROW? Should we create an industrial alliance for renewables, for instance? This is still missing. Last but not least, and this goes to my also new career, I believe that we need adequate funding. Money is always an issue, and this is an issue also here. We know that the EU is doing a lot. We have Horizon Europe, the Innovation Fund, we have the Connecting Europe facility. I've seen a comment in the chat before. We have the InvestEU. We have the new Next Generation EU package, and all this will help promote the renewable energy industry. But I also believe that this is not enough. It's equally important to unlock private investment, leveraging and blending EU money with those coming from member states or those coming from institutional partners and private investors. And in this respect, I believe that the European Investment Bank, and I see that we have a representative of the bank in the list of participants, but also the National Promotional Bank and Institution could really play a central role to push forward investment in the renewable energy field. Thank you very much, and the floor is back to you, Ruud, for the next steps.
Thank you very much, Felice, with this kind of indeed step back, but then also looking forward in terms of the study. Now, before we want to continue with the next question, I quickly want to ask Naomi and Josh to respond to this idea or this notion, what Felicia said, that the different renewables value chains, the renewables technologies are very different and the value chains are very different. And at the same time, we have now this renewables ecosystem. So not only if you not only look at solar and wind, but the whole range, including kind of the different geothermal, solar thermal, ocean energy, bioenergy, etc. Do you think the industry is the renewables industry as a whole is strong enough to be one front, or do you think indeed that there's still too much differences among the kind of the technology maturity, the differences in terms of the technologies, etc., to make one big front? Because of course, if you want to create an industrial ecosystem on renewables, you'll have to compete with other industrial ecosystems like health, like defense, like digitalization, etc. What is your perspective there?
Maybe I can start. First of all, I want to say that I fully share what Felicia has just shared. I think it's really the questions that we're asking ourselves now, and the sort of paradigm shift that you're suggesting. And just to add that we started to implement this paradigm shift in our industry because we created the European Solar Initiative, which is the idea is to really have an industrial alliance on solar PV. And the idea is really to implement exactly what you just mentioned. On your question, Ruud, I think I would say that we share still a lot on the downstream part of things, especially, for example, with the wind industry. We have similar challenges, for example, regarding administrative procedures. So I think, yes, we can be a united front, and we also know that renewables will be complementary in the future energy system, and it's also we can drive this united front with the European Commission. Now, when it comes to the upstream part, I think there are still significant differences in the value chain, and there the more technology specific approach is maybe the best way to deal with it. Because also, I think sometimes even in the solar industry, we have similarities with complete other value chains. So for example, in the semiconductor industry or this kind of other industries, and this is more where we would see synergies rather than with the wind industry.
Yeah, I agree. Sorry.
Go for it, Josh.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say I agree with Naomi. I think that the renewable energy sectors are at very, very different levels of development, technological readiness. I would say we probably have most in common with solar when it comes to the challenges we're facing, such as permitting and to an extent trade, and ocean energy when it comes to the kind of scaling up. But I'm doubtful as to the utility of a kind of renewable energy industrial alliance, because, you know, the challenges we're facing are so different. I think the Clean Energy Industrial Forum would be quite a good next step. But there I'm a little bit skeptical about proposals to extend the membership further beyond renewable energy towards energy efficiency or, you know, carbon capture technologies. I think, you know, we're different enough as it is, and we don't want to further dilute the discussions by extending the membership of that forum too much. I would say the idea of a strategy for renewable energy competitiveness would be very welcome. I think that would leave room for, you know, considerations for each technology, so wind, solar, geothermal, ocean, etc. So yeah, we would definitely welcome that, because I think that's one thing that is missing, this strategic approach, this coordination between different DGs. We have DG Trade doing one thing when it comes to trade defense, but this isn't complemented by flanking policies from other DGs. So I think we do really need a more strategic approach to renewables.
Thank Thank you. Ulrike, I also want to kind of come back to you. If you now hear this idea of kind of more industrial strategies around the creation of a European renewables sector, is this something you also see in other countries? Do you think that's something which can particularly help Europe? Or is it something which you know, you see, okay, deployment is much more important than an industrial strategy?
Well, I mean, there's always when you have been around renewables for quite some time, you see how things basically come in waves, right? I mean, there's European strategies or international other countries' strategies. There are, I don't know, North American or what have you strategies at a certain point, and then somehow you have the next wave and the other wave also then joining in and joining forces. And so I think at this point, and that is, I think that is the challenge also of studies like this and also of our work at IRENA, is to really keep up with what is needed right now and to provide the respective information for what we all want, a large-scale deployment of renewable energy beyond industry and beyond also, let's say, the discussion of market push or market pull is basically demanding. So what we are trying with also providing, let's say, policy briefs on finance. So maybe there's something Felice does not know yet, which is the latest policy briefs on finance coming out this year. So what we all have to do, I think, is try to provide the very latest information. And so I was totally grateful for what Naomi said also. The 2018 statistical data, I know this is what you can do with some of the data sources, but of course there's 2019, 2020, and meanwhile 2021 values. And it is really, I think, really challenging to keep up. But it's also very, very necessary to keep up to then inform the discussion and then have the decision right there. Yeah.
Thank you. I have another 20 minutes, so I quickly want to jump into the next one, which is the different policy interventions which have been discussed in this study. I won't go to this one to you, Felice, first, because you already said you think these are the 5 best ones you can come up with. But also in the chat, we have some questions saying, okay, maybe there are other policy options which could have been considered. So if I go back to Naomi first again, of those 5 policy options which have been put in place, where would you say is kind of what you think is the most important ones for solar or maybe renewables in general? And also, has the study missed something where you think, okay, that's a policy option which should have been considered?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, first, I think all the recommendations that were put forward are very, very relevant. Now, I think it started a bit the paradigm shift that Felice was mentioning. Maybe we need to take the extra step and have really, I like the notion of action plans. This is something that we work on in Solar Power Europe. And I think probably we should, in the end, at one point, develop it in an action plan per technology, following a bit the movement where what I was mentioning, that off-takers are also more preoccupied by the upstream part of the value chain. On the recommendations, well, I think maybe one addition I would have is the ambition. I mean, it's now really high in the debate, the question of the renewable energy target. But I think it's very interesting to have still high ambition and clear objectives. We've been pushing in Solar Power Europe to work on 100% renewable energy scenarios. And if you look at countries, you see that a lot of electricity system operators, for example, are using those ideas to run scenarios, to make analysis, etc., on whether the system would work with 100% renewable energies, and that's very positive. So maybe I think we could reinforce the aspect of ambition. The second is, I mean, once we have ambition, we need performing regulatory frameworks, and there I think the recommendations on administrative procedures is really important for us, as well on the topic of accessing finance. And yeah, we're fully aligned with what you mentioned, Felice. On permitting, of course, it's challenging because we're in an implementation phase, but I think the recommendations go in the sense of having a more improved dialogues with the industry and the member states in the implementation. And the last point is what I see important is the topic of R&D and the funding for demonstration technologies. So again, here I think it's very important, but maybe we miss the next steps, because once the technologies are demonstrated, once they you have a good pilot, you have two choices: either you build a factory in Europe, or you export it and you export your knowledge to foreign countries. And that's where maybe we need a bit of help. It doesn't mean that we need to over-subsidize factories. It just means that we need to push them so that they reach a sizable scale, and for factories to be competitive. And that's here we'll have to use tools from industrial policy, so that's support to financing, also maybe working on ensuring a level playing field with other manufacturers. But yeah, maybe there is something we could think about here. But it's all going very fast, so we're happy to keep contributing to this reflection.
Thank you. Going back to you, Ulrike, again. So you said Irene has been doing studies on kind of, you know, leveraging the economic value of renewable value chains. So if you look at the kind of the 5 policy options here, which range indeed from financing to permitting to indeed the R&D, this extra step, export, and also, you know, the creation and awareness making. Are those also the policy elements you look at, or do you have some additional elements which would be useful here as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is exactly what we are also looking at. And if you want me to do so, I could just put a couple of links in the chat to just referring to the respective work, which is all from this year, so it's fairly new and maybe it is interesting for people. No, but these are the areas we have been also looking at and which we deem important. Of course, being a membership-oriented organization and a global organization, we have been lately also looking beyond the renewable energy framework at, you know, for instance, just transition policies, and more at the social impact policies also. What I'm a little bit missing, maybe it is because this has this is a European study, is the whole aspect of training, education, qualification, and I mean this whole area is totally missing in the policy set here. That is something we are also trying to strengthen. That relates to, of course, quality, to acceptance, to, you know, all this whole realm. So maybe there is something that can be then taken on in the next study.
Thank you. And your view, Josh, I know that Wind Europe has also kind of raised some concerns, for example, on permitting, which is indeed one of the areas which we looked at. Is that, from your perspective, indeed the one which could kind of create the competitiveness, or maintain, or even strengthen the competitiveness of the wind industry, or do you also see the elements which are important for the whole value chain?
Yeah, I think permitting is the #1 challenge for the wind industry today. If we can solve permitting, we can unlock market scale. The current situation is there just aren't enough projects. Which means that the wind turbine manufacturers, the OEMs, which have an overcapacity in Europe, are competing very fiercely to supply these projects. So this is driving down their margins, and is one explanation for why most of them weren't making money even before the pandemic. So I think if we can unlock permitting, if we can increase market scale, I think that would do a lot for the financial situation of the industry. And here, I mean, we're really asking for support from DG ENER specifically. I think we need more steer from EU level. We need guidance on best practices for permitting, because the current situation isn't sustainable. When it comes to finance, I don't see finance as being a barrier to wind energy deployment today. If you ask anyone in the wind energy sector, they will tell you that financing is cheap, money is cheap, interest rates are low. Perhaps financing is an issue when it comes to new manufacturing capacity, for example, in the solar sector, but we don't really see financing as a major issue for us. That being said, on the export credit side, I think there is room for improvement. We appreciate what the study says here, and it's good that the Commission has already taken up these recommendations. I think DG Trade is commissioning a feasibility study on a possible EU export credit facility. So that's very positive. On research and development, I think the thing to say is that yes, more money would be good. Wind has been underfunded by the Horizon programs in recent years, and I think a large part of this is because wind is seen as a mature technology. I do think wind energy can still benefit from public R&D support. However, the bulk of R&D spend in the wind energy sector does come from the private sector. And again, if only one wind turbine manufacturer is making money today, that means that the funds available for R&D and for investments in new manufacturing capacity are less. So if you want to unlock R&D spend, I think you need to sort out the financial position of the industry. And again, I think if you want to do that, you have to look at the policies that weren't covered by this study, perhaps, such as trade defense policies, which are increasing costs for the industry, increasing costs of raw materials imported from third countries, and potentially increasing costs of components. And also policies like carbon border adjustment, which will make steel more expensive, which will make aluminium more expensive, and also sustainability standards, for example, for permanent magnets. And, you know, this affects also solar panels as well. So I think if we do develop a strategy, the next step would be to square these policies, or one of the things the strategy should cover is how do we square policies that increase costs for the sector with this continued societal expectation that wind electricity prices will continue to come down, because I don't think we can assume that they'll come down as fast in the next 10 years as they have over the past 10 years. Yeah, I would say that pretty much covers it. So permitting is really number one.
Thank you very much. Now I quickly want to go back to you, Felice, because now we've indeed heard from the others about the policy recommendations, including some suggestions for additional areas to look at. So I've got two questions for you. First, your kind of response to these additional suggestions, for example, training, trade policy defense measures, but also the second question, which you actually posed on governance. Indeed, like we see that it's becoming kind of an all-encompassing strategy and action plans. And of course, DG ENER would be ready to take that role. The question is to you is, do you think from the outset that DG Ener is the right player in this? Or as we are moving indeed from an energy policy where we've looked at targets, where we looked at production support, etc., moving towards more of an industrial policy, that other players are more suited to take these governance roles?
So when it comes to the comments that I've collected, yes, I agree that there are some areas that we have not covered. Of course, I mean, training is one of these. Raising awareness has been partially covered in the policy brief number 5 on renewable heating and cooling. We need not to do it for the full industry. But there are also other areas that we did not cover that are very important, and as I mentioned, for instance, the issue of taxation. The way we are going to tax the fossil fuels and avoid, subsidy scheme for fossil fuel will really be a game changer for the uptake of many renewable energy technologies and services. I also believe that when it comes to the other aspect to explore, we should not forget the role that member states play in implementing EU policy. And this, for instance, is why we propose these renewable deals, a way in which the industry could try to speak with the Commission to solve barrier of obstacle that emerge at member state level, because the competence of the Commission in this field is shared. So, you can prepare the framework, but the member states have a large role in implementing. And, you can also have the perfect framework. And I believe that the one on permitting is already quite good in the current Renewable Energy Directive, because you set a maximum timing for implementing, for giving permitting. The rules are simplified. There is the one-stop shop, but something is not working. So I read that probably also in that we looked at the EU policy, but there is a lot to do to make sure that the EU policy become effective at the member state level. When it comes to the trade defense, I think that this is a clear case in which you can see the difference between the different sectors, because a trade defense instrument may help some sector to grow locally, because you can really try to develop some technology and protect them from dumping from third countries. However, the use of trade defensive instrument or a carbon border adjustment measure will increase the cost on some raw material or components that at any rate the EU industry will import. So this is really a clear case in which different value chain may have different interests, and also different segment of the same value chain may have different views. And this leads to the need for a governance. I mean, you need to find a way to strike the right balance. To try to find the right balance between the interests of all the value chains and make sure that they all grow. They are all very important. If you look, for instance, to having 100% renewable energy in the energy mix, this is possible, but as far as I know, unless battery will improve radically, it's not possible only with wind and solar. You need to have hydropower, you need to have geothermal, you need to have marine energy, because you need to have those sources that can allow you to take care of the base load when you don't have wind or you have a cloudy day. So they are all important, and we need to have a good governance. I believe that DG Energy is the right place, is the right directorate to take the driver's seat, but I don't believe that DG Energy can operate alone. This is not possible. And, I've been doing many interviews for this study. For instance, there are divergences when it comes to international cooperation. You can see the international cooperation as US does or Japan does as a way to create new markets for European technologies. But, if you want to have a very orthodox approach to international cooperation, you have to allow the countries to grow. You don't have to favor your company above other companies. This is a clear case in which you need to coordinate. So, Ruud, I believe, yes, you should take the driver's seat, but you should create a kind of, what you usually call a steering committee, which should include all the relevant DGs, the right person from any DGs, to make sure that you coordinate at all policy level. And I also believe that it's important in this steering committee or group to not have only the policymakers, but also have the right representative from the industry. And why not also from those that, you know, rely on renewable energy? So, you know, a lot of the, and we did the study before this, you remember 2 years ago, a lot can come from private demand for renewable energy. So I think that you should really get the driver's seat, but you should create a kind of forum, maybe expanding a bit the clean energy forum, just a bit, not involving other technologies, to make sure that, you know, you represent all the stakeholders, and you have policy solutions that respond to the needs of the renewable energy industry, but, you know, are shared across all the Commission Directorate, involving member states, and make sure that, you know, this also match the needs of those that demand, that buy renewable electricity.
Thank you very much, Felice. Now, I want to take the last couple of minutes, also advantage of all the authors of the report being here. So I already noted a couple of questions in the chat, but also in our discussion right now, which I want to put forward to the authors of the report. And the first two questions, I believe Yannis can maybe help us with that. And that is the first question, which was from the chat, whether kind of renewable fuels are also covered in terms of the value chain analysis in the report. And then the second one, which Ulrike raised, which is on trade. So you mentioned kind of, you showed aggregate trade data to a couple of countries, both imports and exports. What else can the study tell us on this? And then I also want to give the opportunity then, while you answer, for any other questions which are still coming up also from the panelists to let me know, and then we can take those as well. So with that, Yannis, would you be able to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes, sure. So regarding renewable fuels, we considered bioenergy in two value chains, and of course, renewable fuel stemming from bioenergy is one of the major products that comes out of the value chain bioenergy conversion. So we considered this. Regarding other fuels, for example, green hydrogen production, this was something that we did not include in the statistical analysis, but has been considered in the case studies we presented. So I hope this answers the question on fuels. Regarding trade data, I agree with Ulrike that there are many more questions that are issues that can be looked at, and some of those questions can be answered also with taking a deeper look into trade data. Other questions are then subject to further analyses on the specific markets and the political developments in these markets and the specific demands. Regarding the trade data in the study, we rather took an overall assessment, an overall look on the value chains and exports of the EU and other major competitors. What the data also offers, and what we can provide to you, Ruud, in an extra presentation of the results, is that showing further insights or details of the specific trade patterns or the export destinations of the EU into specific individual markets, also on a component level. So not only for the whole value chain, but on specific components. So that is something that we can still provide. And was there a third question? I don't recall.
Not that I'm aware of, but please, panelists, let me know if there are any other questions. I have indeed one question from Ulrike already in the chat, and that is indeed that the study has also developed an Excel tool. And we've already heard now a couple of times also from the panelists that 2016 data or 2018 data is not relevant anymore, and we should be able to update it. So I don't know, probably not you, Yannis, but someone from COWI can maybe explain us a little bit more about what this Excel spreadsheet does then, because indeed this was one of our questions to the contractors. We don't want to just a report because it will be out of date in the next year. We want something which we can use to kind of really kind of not only evaluate the policy options, but do that dynamically as well. So which colleague from COWI could explain in a couple of minutes what the product is and how it could be used?
Well, I can start out. This is Morten Hermann from COWI, and I designed the Excel tool. The Excel tool is designed to be updated, basically. I think that's very important to stress. It's based on the available data we had today, but it's also very much made so that future users can go in and update the various assumptions made in the tool. Of course, the work that Prognos has done is a very large body of work, and it's not necessarily done overnight in any way, but there's definitely a methodological description of how to do it. So it should be possible to go in and update not only the assumptions, but also the underlying data when new Prodcom data is available, for example. And that has been important from the get-go, that this is something that needs to be a living tool that can be updated in the future. Yeah, I maybe Yannis, you could say a bit more about how the sort of underlying data can be updated in terms of value chains and value chain segments and the data that you use for that process.
Mm-hmm. So what I tried to quickly explain in a few minutes on the statistical modeling approach was that we dived deep into available Prodcom, CN, and NACE classification systems, and we identified the codes that are relevant for the individual renewable energy value chains. And so what the user of the tool can do, of course, is to insert new data that becomes available from Eurostat or other UN sources that we also used to have an updated body of data, ground data sources. But so that would be one aspect of updating it, and at least this enables, and this is what the tool then allows to make assessments of policy implications on the most recent package of data available. But of course, well, if we go 10 years ahead and then maybe still use the tool, then some of the underlying assumptions regarding the NACE codes that have been considered, and also the shares that have been determined, won't be up to date anymore, because of course technological development is very fast in this field, and also the economic activities and components involved change. So at one point it will be, of course, necessary also to make an update on the underlying assumptions. And that is something that I would assume the user won't be able to do, because it's just well, that requires further research work, and well, that would be that won't be possible for the user to update. So the assumption will remain the same, but the background laying data can be updated.
Thank you very much, Yannis. We are reaching the end of this session today. I also have the task to give some closing words, which I'm actually going to pass over to you, because the study reports, etc., will be delivered in the next couple of weeks, and then of course we need to communicate this to our stakeholders here. So this is a task that still lies ahead of us. So I would love to have your input on that. So if I can go down the list again, Naomi, if you would have to communicate this study to the audience, what is your key by there which you would like to see emphasized?
Well, I think well, first I think the study highlights again what I said before, the importance of renewable energy industries. I think what could be highlighted is the increased weight we have with regards to employment, GVA, and I would also stress the point on innovation. And then I guess, as Felice mentioned, it's probably a good opportunity to start this new governance we need, or create momentum on what we do with these findings. How do we change the way we work, maybe, and how do we implement the recommendations? That would be my thoughts.
You're muted.
Ulrike, from your side?
Well, I mean, there's no single IRENA opinion on this. If I ask my policy people, then they would say, oh, the policy part is, of course, the most, the most prominent part. I'm from the socio-economics unit. I'm more interested in the connection between value added and the policy. And if I ask my country partnership people, then they would say, oh, yeah, but I mean, Europe, this is the role of Europe, and this is the most prominent thing. So what I really think is important for the communication is to take advantage of the momentum that seems to be out there currently in regards to renewables, climate change with the COP ahead, and a lot of greening, post-COVID recovery impetus. So if you can connect to this momentum in the year 2021, I think that would do the communication of the study, and the results are there. You can contribute to this momentum. So I think that would be making the communication of your results quite nice.
Thank you very much, Ulrike. Josh?
Yeah, I would just say I would say it's important to not to be complacent with regards to the conclusions of the study. There's some really nice numbers for wind energy in terms of GVA, employment, and so on and so forth. But I think what it doesn't show is the pressure that the industry is under, especially since 2018. I would say in terms of recommendations, the study is absolutely right when it highlights permitting as a major bottleneck. And yeah, I think if we want to accelerate wind energy build out, that is our number one priority. Simplify those procedures.
Thank you. And then last but not least, Felice.
Good. I think that, if we look what we have done, Europe and at member state level up to 2020 was a kind of whatever it takes to have more renewable electricity and renewable energy generation. I believe that this study proves that, the green transition does not mean to becoming only less carbon intensive, but can generate, employment and gross added value. So I believe, and in this I share the view of President Timmermans. The green transition from now onward, if you look at 2030, should not be only green, but must be also fair. And for this reason, I really believe that we should change a bit the approach from whatever it takes to have more renewable energy generation to whatever it takes to have a new renewable energy industry. So, I mean, my main takeaway is that we need to focus on an industrial strategy for the European renewable energy industry to make sure that we don't have only more electricity and more heating, which is clean, but also we have more jobs, more technology, more autonomy in these sectors.
Thank you very much for this. Like I said, the report is still being finalized now in the next couple of weeks. So you will get the reports very, very soon. I thank you very much, the 4 panelists, but also the people who participated today, for your feedback and your inputs. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Marlene to conclude.
Thank you very much. Well, actually, my concluding remarks would be the same. We are finishing this study, completing the deliverables, expecting them to be in the hands of DG Energy late June, early July. There may be a short feedback round, so I suppose you would make them publicly available sometime around mid-end July or something like that. So that was about the process. I would also, like Ruth, like to thank you very much, all the participants. Thanks for your answers, your participation. It's not always easy in these virtual days. Thank you also very much to the panel for bringing, I'm sure also to the team, new insights and new knowledge to what we already thought we knew a lot about. So thank you, everyone, and wishing you a nice day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.